Her husband set the last suitcase down on the wet driveway at 10:47 p.m. and closed the front door without looking at her. The rain had been falling on Beatty's Ford Road in Charlotte, North Carolina for almost 2 hours. The kind of rain that comes down in sheets and turns the gutters into small brown rivers running toward the storm drains. She stood there in a thin gray sweater and a maternity dress the color of dried lavender, one hand pressed under her belly, the other still holding the house keys he had told her to leave on the kitchen counter. She had forgotten to leave them. She would remember, hours later, that she had forgotten. The porch light above her flickered twice, and then went out. Inside the house, she heard the deadbolt turn. Then the chain. Then a second lock she had not known was there. She stood on the driveway for 11 minutes without moving, because moving would mean deciding, and deciding would mean admitting that this was real. When she finally began to walk, she carried one suitcase, a plastic Kroger bag with 2 changes of clothes, and a small brown envelope her grandmother had given her 9 years ago in a village outside Kumasi. She did not know where she was going. She did not know who would open a door for a woman like her at that hour of the night. But there was a woman on the other side of the city who would, and that woman had been waiting for her for 31 years without knowing it. Her name was Abina Owusu Boateng, and she was 32 years old and 8 months and 3 weeks pregnant with a boy she had already decided to name Kwado after her father, who had died in Kumasi the year she moved to America. She weighed 141 pounds, which the nurse at the free clinic on Freedom Drive had told her was low for her stage of pregnancy. And Abina had nodded and said thank you, and not explained that she had been eating 1 full meal a day for the last 4 months, because Gerald had cut the grocery budget in half after he lost his job at the dealership. She was 5'4". Her hair was pulled back in a low bun the way her mother used to wear hers on Sundays. She smelled faintly of shea butter and the laundry detergent she bought at the dollar store on West Boulevard, because it was 99 cents cheaper than the brand Gerald preferred. The maternity dress she was wearing had cost her $4 at the Goodwill on South Tryon. It was clean. She had washed it by hand in the bathroom sink the night before, hung it over the shower rod to dry, and pressed it that morning with the small travel iron her mother-in-law had given them as a wedding gift 6 years ago. Worn but clean. That was the rule she kept for herself. Her grandmother in Kumasi had told her once, when she was 7 years old and hiding a torn school uniform, that poverty was not a shame, but dirtiness was a decision. She had never forgotten it. Even now, walking through the rain on Beatty's Ford Road with a plastic bag pressed against her chest, she stepped carefully around the muddy puddles so she would not track dirt into wherever she ended up sleeping. In the plastic bag, tucked between 2 folded shirts, was a small brown envelope her grandmother had pressed into her hand at the airport in Accra 9 years ago. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, and a photograph the size of her palm. Her grandmother had made her promise not to open it until she was ready, and Abina had asked what ready meant, and her grandmother had said in Twi that Abina would know. She had carried that envelope through 3 apartments, 2 cities, and 1 bad marriage. She had never opened it, not once. She was trying, in that moment, to do the smallest possible thing a person could try to do. She was trying to find somewhere dry to sit down, because her feet were swollen and she could feel the baby pressing against her hip in a way that meant she needed to stop walking soon. That was all. That was her goal. Somewhere dry. A chair. A bathroom she could use. She was not thinking about her marriage or her future, or the letter her husband had shown her 4 hours ago that said the house was being foreclosed on and they had 30 days to leave. She was thinking about her feet and the baby, and how far the next bus stop was. She had walked 6 blocks before she realized she did not have enough on her transit card for the ride downtown to the women's shelter on 10th Street. She stopped under the awning of a closed nail salon and checked the card again, twice, the way people check things when they cannot afford for the number to be what the number is. $2.17. The bus was $2.75. She was 58 cents short. She did not cry. She stood under the awning and folded the sweater tighter around her shoulders and watched the rain fall on the empty parking lot across the street. And she thought about her grandmother. And she thought about the envelope in the plastic bag. And for the first time in 9 years, she wondered if she was ready. The system that had brought her here had not been cruel in the way people imagine cruelty. It had been polite. It had followed procedure. The woman at the bank branch on Freedom Drive who had told her 3 weeks earlier that she could not be added to Gerald's account without his signature had been polite. Her name was Denise, and her name tag said Assistant Branch Manager. And she had looked at Abina's maternity dress and her cheap sandals, and had said, in a voice trained by corporate policy, that she was so sorry, but there was nothing she could do. The receptionist at the Obgyn office on Randolph Road who had told her that the copay was $90 and that they could not see her without it had been polite. The landlord who had left the eviction notice on the door of the little rental house on Beatty's Ford Road last month had been polite. None of them had raised their voices. None of them had said anything cruel. They had all simply followed the rules of institutions that had been designed a long time ago by people who never expected a woman like Abina to walk through their doors. Gerald had followed rules too. His rules were the rules of a man who had learned, watching his father, that a woman who leaves is a woman who is a burden. His mother had told him once, at Thanksgiving, that Abina was too dark and too African and too proud. And Gerald had laughed and said nothing, and Abina had heard it through the kitchen doorway and had not said anything either, because she had learned, watching her own mother, that a woman who stays quiet keeps a home. She had been wrong about that. She understood it now, standing under the awning of the closed nail salon with 58 cents missing from her bus fare. She had been wrong for a long time. 2 cars had passed her while she was walking. One of them had slowed down. A man had rolled down his passenger window and had looked at her and had said something she had not heard. And then he had laughed and driven off. Another car had honked. A woman on the sidewalk across the street had watched her for a full block and had then turned and gone into a lit house and had closed the door. Abina had counted those things without meaning to. She kept counting. She had been counting for a long time. The rain got worse. The wind changed direction, and the rain came sideways under the awning, and Abina moved deeper against the wall of the nail salon, and she felt the first hard contraction across the small of her back. It lasted 22 seconds. She counted. When it passed, she pressed her hand against the wall and breathed out slowly through her mouth the way the nurse at the free clinic had shown her. And she thought about her grandmother again, and she opened the plastic bag and took out the brown envelope. She did not open it. She held it in her hand and looked at it, and then she put it back. Not yet. She still had a little time. She started walking again. She did not know where she was going. She turned off Beatty's Ford and cut through a side street she had never walked down before, and then she cut through another one, and by the time she looked up, she was on a quiet residential street lined with older houses set back from the road, houses with wide porches and stone paths and iron mailboxes at the curb. The street sign said Rosewood Lane. She had never heard of it. She walked past 3 houses that were completely dark. She walked past a 4th that had a porch light on, but no lights inside. She walked past a fifth. And then she stopped. The sixth house on the left side of Rosewood Lane had a light on in the front window. Not a porch light, a lamp, inside, on a table near the window, throwing a soft yellow color out onto the wet lawn. The house was smaller than the others, painted pale blue with white trim. There was a rocking chair on the porch. There was a small hand-painted sign on the mailbox that said, in careful cursive letters, the Owusu House. Abina stood on the sidewalk and read the sign twice. Owusu, her own family name, before Boateng had been added to it. Her grandmother's name, her father's name. There were 40,000 Ghanaians in the Carolinas. It meant nothing. It could mean nothing. She was so tired that she was reading signs and looking for meaning where there was only coincidence. She almost kept walking. She did not keep walking. She walked up the stone path and up the 4 steps of the porch, and she stood in front of the door, and she knocked. 3 times. Gently, not hard enough to sound desperate. Just hard enough to be heard by someone who was already awake. She did not know who lived behind that door. But the woman behind that door had been waiting for someone to knock for a long time, and she already knew, before she opened it, that tonight was the night. The door opened. The woman standing on the other side was older than Abina by at least 40 years. She was small, maybe 5 feet even, with silver hair pulled back in a way that reminded Abina so much of her grandmother that for a second she forgot to speak. The woman was wearing a long red housecoat and slippers with sheepskin lining, and she smelled of ginger and something like the roasted groundnut soup Abina's mother used to make on Sundays. She looked at Abina for a long time, without speaking. She looked at the wet dress. She looked at the belly. She looked at the plastic bag. And then she looked at Abina's face, and something happened in the woman's face that Abina could not read. "Come in," the woman said. 2 words. She stepped back from the door, and she did not ask any questions. She did not ask who Abina was, or where she had come from, or what had happened. She said, "Come in," and she stepped back, and Abina walked into the small warm house on Rosewood Lane and stood in the front hall dripping on the rug, and the woman closed the door behind her and turned the lock. "Sit down," the woman said. "I'll bring you a towel." Abina sat down on the couch in the front room, and she did not cry. She looked around the room. There were photographs on the walls, black frames, arranged carefully, showing faces Abina did not know. A wedding photograph in the center. A young woman in a graduation gown. A boy of about 10 holding a fish he had caught. A photograph, near the window, of a girl about 7 years old standing in front of what looked like a market in Kumasi. Abina looked at that photograph for a long time. She could not have said why. The woman came back with a towel and a folded blanket and a mug of something hot that smelled like ginger and cloves. She wrapped the blanket around Abina's shoulders, and she put the mug in Abina's hands, and she sat down in the rocking chair across from her, and she said, "My name is Willamay." "What is yours?" "Abina," said Abina. "Abina what?" said Willamay. "Abina Owusu Boateng," said Abina. Willamay did not react. She did not say anything for a long time. She rocked once in the rocking chair, and then again, and she looked at Abina and she said, "Drink your tea." Abina drank her tea. It was ginger and cloves and something else she could not name, and it was hot enough to hurt her tongue, but she drank it anyway, because it was the first warm thing she had had in 8 hours. Willamay watched her drink. When Abina had finished half the mug, Willamay stood up and went into the kitchen and came back with a plate of jollof rice on a small white saucer. And she set it on the coffee table in front of Abina and she said, "Eat slowly. The baby will thank you." Abina ate. She ate slowly, the way she had been told, and Willa May rocked in the rocking chair and did not speak, and the rain kept falling on the window behind her. When Abena had finished eating, Willa May stood up and took the plate away and came back and sat down and said, "You'll sleep in the back room tonight. Tomorrow we will talk." "Not tonight." "Thank you," said Abena. "I don't have any money." "I can't. Tomorrow," said Willa May. One word. It stopped Abena the way certain words stop certain people, and Abena nodded and did not try to explain anything else. Willa May walked her down the hall to a small room with a made bed and a nightstand and a lamp with a yellow shade, and she gave her a nightgown that was too big for her and a pair of clean socks, and she said good night and closed the door. Abena lay down on the bed and put her hand under her belly and felt Kwadwo move once, slowly, and she closed her eyes and she slept for the first time in 3 days. At 2 in the morning, Willa May picked up the phone in the kitchen and made a call. If this story is landing on you the way I think it is, subscribe now, because what Willa May said on that phone call is the reason a woman named Abena Owusu Boateng walked through the wrong door on the wrong night and found her whole life waiting on the other side of it. The person Willa May called was her son. His name was Kofi Mensah, and he was 58 years old and lived in a house in the Cantonments district of Accra when he was in Ghana and in a large house in Ballantyne on the south side of Charlotte when he was in the United States. He owned 3 hotels in Accra and had a partial stake in a shipping company in Tema, and he was the kind of man whose name was recognized in certain rooms and unknown in every other room in the world. Willa May called him because she had promised her sister 31 years ago that if this day ever came, she would call him. And this day had come. She could see it in the girl's face. She had seen it the moment she opened the door. Kofi answered on the second ring. His mother did not call him at 2 in the morning. She had never once called him at 2 in the morning in the 30 years she had lived on Rosewood Lane. "Ma," he said. "She is here," said Willa May. Kofi Mensah did not ask who. He said, "Are you sure?" "I am sure," said Willa May. "Her name is Abena Owusu Boateng. She is 8 months pregnant. She is asleep in the back room. She walked here in the rain." There was a silence on the phone. Then Kofi said, "I will be there in the morning." "Not the morning," said Willa May. "Tomorrow afternoon. Let her rest." And Kofi, "Bring the file." "I will bring the file," said Kofi. They hung up. Willa May sat at the kitchen table for a long time, and then she went into her bedroom, and she opened the top drawer of the dresser, and she took out a small brown envelope that was almost identical to the one Abena had been carrying, and she set it on top of the dresser where she would remember it in the morning, and she went to bed. In the back room, Abena slept without moving. On the nightstand next to her, the plastic Kroger bag sat on the floor, and the small brown envelope with the folded sheet of paper and the palm-sized photograph sat inside it. And neither of them had been opened for 9 years. They would both be opened tomorrow. The 2 envelopes had been written by the same person on the same day in 1994, and they had been waiting in 2 different houses on 2 different continents for these 2 women to find each other. Willa May Owusu had grown up in Kumasi in the 1940s in a family of 4 sisters, and the third of those sisters had been named Ajoa. Ajoa was Abena's grandmother. Ajoa had married a market trader named Owusu Boateng in 1958 and had 1 son, Abena's father, and had died of a stroke at the age of 67 in a small blue house on the outskirts of Kumasi in the summer of 2016. Willa May had left Ghana in 1962, first for London and then for Chicago and finally for Charlotte, and she had lost touch with Adjoa by the end of the 1970s because letters got lost and phone calls were expensive and life took the shape it took. But in the summer of 1994, Adjoa had written to Willa May one final letter. In it, she had told Willa May about the baby she was raising, her son's daughter, a 5-year-old girl named Abina, because the son and his wife had died in a bus accident on the road between Kumasi and Sunyani. Adjoa had asked Willa May one favor. If the child ever came looking, she wrote, take her in. Do not ask questions. Feed her. Warm her. Tell her who she is. Along with the letter, Adjoa had sent Willa May a small brown envelope. She had told Willa May to keep it sealed. She had also sent an identical envelope, she said, to her granddaughter, to be opened when the granddaughter was ready. Willa May had promised. She had kept the envelope in her dresser for 31 years. She had prayed every Sunday for a knock at her door. Kofi arrived at Rosewood Lane at 4:17 the next afternoon. He drove a black Lincoln that he parked at the curb, and he walked up the stone path carrying a slim leather briefcase, and he was wearing a navy blue suit and a white shirt with no tie. He was tall and thin, and he had his mother's eyes, and he did not smile when he came in. He kissed his mother on the forehead. He set the briefcase on the coffee table. He looked at Abina, who was sitting on the couch in a dry dress Willa May had lent her, and he said, "My name is Kofi. I am your grandmother's cousin's son. That makes us family." Abina did not know what to say. She said thank you. It was the only thing she could think of. Kofi opened the briefcase. He took out a folder. Inside the folder were 3 documents, and he laid them on the coffee table one at a time. The first was a copy of a letter written in his mother's hand, dated August of 1994, addressed to a woman in Kumasi named Adjoa. The second was a copy of a letter written in Adjoa's hand, dated September of 1994, addressed to Willa May. The third was a certified copy of a deed to a house in the Cantonments district of Accra, and the name on the deed was Abina Owusu Boateng. Abina looked at the deed. She read it twice. She said, "I don't understand. Your grandmother put this house in your name when you were 5 years old," said Kofi. "She used the money her husband had left her, and she bought a small property in Accra. And she put it in your name and gave the deed to my mother to hold. My mother has been paying the property taxes for 31 years. Abina looked at Willa May. Willa May was rocking in the rocking chair. She said nothing. "There is more," said Kofi. He took out a second folder. "The house has been rented for the last 19 years to a family that pays a monthly rent that is accumulated in a trust account. The trust account was opened by my mother in your name in 2006, when you would have been 13. It has been earning interest. The balance as of last Friday is $184,216. Abina did not move. She sat on the couch and she looked at the paper on the coffee table, and she did not move. In the kitchen, a clock ticked. On the couch, Kwadwo shifted against her hip. Outside the window, the afternoon light had turned the color of tea. "There is one more thing," said Kofi. He looked at his mother. Willa May nodded. Kofi reached into his jacket pocket and took out a small brown envelope. He set it on the coffee table next to the deed. "My mother has been carrying this for 31 years. There is another one just like it. Your grandmother sent it to you the same year. She meant for you to open both of them when you were ready. My mother is going to open hers now, if that is all right with you. And you will decide when to open yours." Willa May stopped rocking. She reached for the envelope. She opened it slowly, with her fingernail, the way people open things that are older than they are. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded in thirds, and a photograph the size of a palm. Willa May unfolded the paper. She read it silently. Then she read it out loud, in Twi, and then in English, for Abena. The letter said, in Ajoa's handwriting, "To my sister, Willa May. If Abena has come to you, then I am gone. I want you to know that the child you are looking at is the last of our line. I have taught her everything I know. Feed her, warm her, and tell her the truth about who she is. She is not poor. She was never poor. She is the daughter of a house that has been standing in Kumasi for 4 generations, and she is forgotten because we did not tell her. That is our fault. Fix it. Your sister Ajoa." The photograph in the envelope was of a girl about 7 years old, standing in front of a market in Kumasi. It was the same photograph on the wall by the window. Abena had not recognized herself. She had been too young. She had never seen the picture. She sat on the couch on Rosewood Lane, and she looked at the photograph, and she did not cry. She reached into the plastic Kroger bag on the floor, and she took out the small brown envelope her grandmother had given her at the airport in Accra 9 years ago. And she held it in her hand. And she opened it. The letter inside was identical to the one Willa May had read. That night, Abena slept in the back room again, and Kwadwo moved twice inside her, and outside the rain had stopped, and the moon was up over Rosewood Lane. And in the front room, Willa May sat in the rocking chair with the deed on her lap, and she looked at the photograph of her sister's granddaughter, and she rocked, and she prayed. In Ballantyne, on the south side of Charlotte, Kofi Mensah sat in his study and made 3 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer in Accra. The second was to a private hospital in Charlotte that his shipping company had a corporate account with. The third was to a woman he knew at the family court downtown. By the following Thursday, Abena had been admitted to a private maternity ward at a hospital in Ballantyne, with all costs covered by the corporate account. By the Thursday after that, she had given birth to a healthy baby boy, 6 pounds 11 ounces, whom she named Kwadwo Owusu, without the Boateng, because Gerald had signed the divorce papers Kofi's lawyer had brought to him at 11 in the morning 3 days earlier. Gerald had signed them without reading them. He had not wanted a fight. He had thought the fight was over. He had not understood, when he closed the door on Abena on Beattisford Road, that he was closing the door on the last thing in his life that he would ever have any power over. 6 weeks after the birth, Willa May flew with Abena and the baby to Accra. Kofi met them at the airport. They drove into the Cantonments district. The house was a small yellow house with a mango tree in the front yard and a low wall around it and a green gate. Abena stood in front of the green gate with her son in her arms, and she looked at the house that had been hers since she was 5 years old. And she did not cry. She said, in Twi, "Thank you, grandmother." Then she opened the gate and walked in. Gerald thought he left Abena with nothing. But the truth is, he left her with the one thing that could never be taken from her, and the one thing he had never bothered to learn about her. He left her with her name, Owusu Boateng, the name of a house in Kumasi that had been standing for 4 generations, the name of a grandmother who had sent a letter to her sister 31 years ago, and it said, "When the day comes, take her in," the name of a family that had been waiting for her without knowing it, in a small blue house on Rosewood Lane behind a door with a lamp in the window. You can put a woman out in the rain. You can turn off the porch light. You can lock the deadbolt in the chain and a second lock she never knew was there, but you cannot take from her what her grandmother sealed in an envelope 31 years before you ever knew her name. You cannot close the door on a woman whose family has been holding a door open for her since she was 5 years old, on the other side of the ocean. And the night Gerald turned off that porch light was the last night in his life that he ever held power over anything, because while he was locking his door, Abina was walking down Rosewood Lane in the rain. And on the 6th house on the left, there was a lamp on in the front window. And behind that door there was a woman who had been waiting for 31 years for the sound of a knock. And a small brown envelope on a dresser, and a plate of jollof rice she would warm up in a saucepan, and a rocking chair by the window where she would sit and watch a girl she had never met sleep on her couch. And know, without needing to be told, exactly whose granddaughter she was. If a man closed the door on you tonight and told you that you had nothing, would you know where to walk? And if a woman opened her door to you at midnight and said come in without asking a single question, would you have the courage to sit down, eat the food she gave you, and let yourself be found? Leave your answer in the comments. I really want to read it. If this story moved you, subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I'll see you in the next one.